warm welcome to the program today. I'm Akaite Afia. Well, let's dig into today's stories, beginning with what could be an impending row between China and Australia. Over what, you might ask? Well, this has to do with comments made about a tweet showing a digitally altered image of an Australian soldier holding a bloodied knife to the throat of an Afghan child. Australia's Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, called the tweet truly repugnant and called for an apology. The tweet was pinned to the top of China's Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian's social media account. China says the picture was a digital illustration and not a fabricated photo. China says that Australia accusing China of fabricating the photo is false in itself. It comes days after China effectively blocked a $1.2 billion Australian dollar wine export industry by imposing dumping tariffs of up to 200% on Australian wine. Checking in on the coronavirus pandemic, especially in the United States, which recorded at least 10,000 coronavirus deaths and over 1.1 million new cases last week. Officials, however, think the figures could be more, as the Thanksgiving holiday may have caused some underreporting. New cases fell 3.8% in the week ending Sunday, while deaths fell 3.9%, and many testing centers were closed on Thanksgiving Day, with some private labs working with reduced staffing or closed on Friday. Officials say figures for cases and deaths this week may be abnormally high due to a backlog of data from last week. According to a Reuters analysis, hospitals which were not closed due to holidays may provide the most accurate data for last week. Hospitalized COVID-19 patients reached a record high of nearly 93,000 on Sunday, up 11% from last week and double the number reported a month ago. Meanwhile, London-based think tank Legatum Institute says nearly 700,000 people, including 120,000 children, became poor due to the economic crisis caused by the coronavirus pandemic. Legatum Institute says the pandemic will push the total number of poor people in the UK to over 15 million, accounting for 23% of the total population. The study also shows the uneven spread of economic fallout among different groups. Young workers, workers with relatively low income, and workers in sectors like hospitality and retail are the hardest hit by the economic crisis, while the elderly are the least susceptible. According to official figures released Monday, another 12,330 people in Britain have tested positive for COVID-19, bringing the total number of coronavirus cases in the country to 1,629,657. Russia has reported a record 569 deaths linked to the coronavirus, bringing the official death toll to 40,464. Authorities also reported 26,402 new coronavirus infections in the last 24 hours, including 6,524 in the capital, Moscow, bringing the national cumulative tally to 2,322,056. Coronavirus cases have surged in Russia since September, but authorities have resisted imposing a tough lockdown and have said that targeted measures are enough to cope with the crisis. And on this World AIDS Day, the World Health Organization says the COVID-19 pandemic has had a profound effect on people living with HIV, and it has disrupted the programs fighting HIV and put these people at greater risk. The real danger is that people with HIV have a higher risk of contracting another disease because of their compromised immune systems.
There is some evidence that people living with HIV may have an increased risk of severe disease and death from COVID-19. This increased risk has been compounded by disruptions to treatment for people living with HIV. In a WHO survey of 127 countries earlier this year, more than a quarter reported partial disruption to antiretroviral treatment for people with HIV. However, with support from WHO and the work of health and community workers, the number of countries reporting disruptions in HIV services has declined by almost 75% since June.
What we've seen in at least HIV services is that early on we saw some dipping in terms of the number of people getting tested, the number of people getting put onto treatment, and that can have effects over the long term of increased deaths, increased new infections. But we've seen since June up until November, sort of a rebound where as the cases are lower, systems have been able to regroup and put more people back onto therapy, shore up their ARV stocks, make sure that they have adequate supplies, ensure that the healthcare workers are doing multiple tasks, not only taking care of COVID testing, combining COVID and HIV testing with TB testing, so that essentially really that the healthcare workers can start to rebuild and build back better.
Today, just as it has been for 10 years now, is World AIDS Day, when attention is focused on what has been known as the shadow pandemic due to all the attention on the coronavirus pandemic. This year's theme is Ending the HIV/AIDS Epidemic, Resilience and Impact. According to AVERT, one of the groups with global information and education on HIV and AIDS, Nigeria has the second largest HIV epidemic in the world and one of the highest rates of new infections in sub-Saharan Africa. Although HIV prevalence among adults is much less than other sub-Saharan African countries, such as South Africa and Zambia, the size of Nigeria's population means 1.8 million people were living with HIV in 2019. Recent drops in prevalence estimate for the country has been attributed to better surveillance. Also, many people living with HIV in the country are unaware of their status, and Nigeria continues to fall short of providing the recommended number of HIV testing and counseling sites. This year, COVID-19 has been largely blamed for disrupting HIV/AIDS programs, thereby hampering Nigeria from reaching their health targets with the virus. And in China, the health ministry says over 1 million AIDS cases were reported as of the end of October, with a low rising level in the country. The National Health Commission, NHC, said that about 112,000 HIV/AIDS infections were reported nationwide from January to October. As of the end of October, there remained 1.045 million cases in China, and the proportion of sexual transmission is more than 95%, of which heterosexual transmission accounts for over 70%, and there are currently no effective vaccines and drugs in the world, according to the Commission. The NHC says the 13th five-year plan period, 2016 to 2020, China's AIDS prevention and treatment focused on key areas, groups, and processes. AIDS has been basically blocked by transfusion transmission, with nearly no infections reported, and mother-to-child transmission and intravenous drug transmission have also been effectively controlled. A new analysis by Climate Action Tracker Group suggests the goals of the UN Paris Climate Agreement are getting within reach. The group reportedly looked at the climate promises from China and other nations, along with the carbon plans of U.S. President-elect Joe Biden. These commitments would mean the rise in world temperatures could be held to 2.1 C by the end of this century. Previous estimates indicated up to 3 C of heating with disastrous impacts. But the experts are worried the long-term optimism is not matched by short-term plans to cut CO2. For more than a decade, researchers from the Climate Action Tracker have kept a close eye on what countries' collective carbon-cutting pledges mean for our warming world. We have joining us now climate change expert Dr. John Osonwa to discuss this. Welcome to the program, Dr. Osonwa. Thank you. So what are your thoughts concerning this report? It has been a long time the world has received some relief in a climate report.
Well, I am very pleased. As you said, most of the time when we talk about climate impact, it's usually bad news. So this is a welcome development. However, we need to move with caution, because if you look at the analysis, they are basing it primarily on promises that the big countries have made. These are the countries who collectively contribute about 50% of global emissions. China, the United States, Japan, South Korea, and the EU. These are promises, these are pledges, and they are looking into the future, saying by 2050, we want to achieve what we call net zero emission, a zero carbon footprint. And basically what you do is you offset what you're doing with some projects somewhere else. So long term, the projection is wonderful, but we're also worried about the short term in the next 10 years. And you see that what countries are doing in the short term may not be enough to achieve that target. So I am very pleased. We have the opportunity now to begin to drive the projection downward. Initially, it was put at 3 degrees Celsius, rise above pre-industrial level. Now we are saying 2.1 degrees Celsius. That is a huge impact. A lot of people don't understand that 1 degree difference means less people will die. We're going to have less drought, less devastation in terms of forest fires, less catastrophic hurricanes. So it's very good news. I'm excited.
Well, yes, it is very good news. And the report mentions efforts by China and other nations, along with carbon plans of U.S. President-elect Joe Biden. But he hasn't even begun to implement those plans. So can the changes be attributed to other factors? And could Africa, specifically Nigeria, have contributed to this?
Yes, it's a cumulative impact that we're seeing. But we also need to be reminded that the whole of Africa contributes less than 5% to global climate change as it stands now. So even though we are making some positive moves, for instance, just this week, Nigeria is rolling out the switch to gas from petrol for vehicles, which is a huge environmental change, a positive change. We also have, in the near future, they are planning to roll out solar platforms, solar services for about 25 million homes. That will also have a tremendous impact on the carbon footprint of the nation. But overall, those are positive things, but I don't think this particular report is relying on what Africa would do. Because as I said, our contribution is less than 5%. So we're looking at China, we're looking at the US, we're looking at the EU, we're looking at Asia when we try to project what will happen in the near future.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Asonwa.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Activists today took Royal Dutch Shell to court in the Netherlands to demand that the energy firm drastically reduce the production of oil and gas to limit its effects on climate change. 7 activist groups, including Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth Netherlands, filed the lawsuit in the Netherlands in April 2019 on behalf of more than 17,000 Dutch citizens who say the oil giant is threatening human rights as it continues to invest billions in the production of fossil fuels. Friends of the Earth Netherlands director Donald Pols says the group wants Shell to cut its greenhouse gas emissions almost in half by 2030, which would force the Anglo-Dutch firm to quickly move away from oil and gas and direct its investments to sustainable sources of energy. Pols added a legal win for the environmental group would give momentum to the introduction of a CO2 border tax at the European Union level. Shell has repeatedly said it agreed that action to fight climate change was needed, but that this court case would not help.
We're standing in front of the court in The Hague in order to stop Shell from causing dangerous climate change. We're asking the judge to force Shell to reduce its contribution to climate change through its emissions of greenhouse gases by 50% in 10 years' time. We can use this as a legal precedent in order to have similar court cases against other large polluters in other countries. And of course, this will be a stimulus for the European Union to introduce a CO2 border tax, which will force the whole European economy to reduce CO2.
And moving away from the environment, the UN Refugee Agency is appealing to Ethiopian authorities for access to 96,000 Eritrean refugees in the northern Tigray region, where it says food is believed to have run out during the month-long conflict. During a news briefing today, spokesman of the UN High Commission for Refugees, Babar Baloch, said concerns are growing by the hour. When the conflict started, he said, the UNHCR lost contact with the 4 camps set up for a decade in the Tigray region.
UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, is today appealing to the federal authorities in Ethiopia for urgent access in order to reach Eritrean refugees in the Tigray region who are in desperate need of humanitarian assistance and services. Our concerns are growing by the hour. No access to us since the start of the conflict to the 4 refugee camps where there are 96,000 Eritrean refugees. The camps have been there at least over a decade. And when the conflict started, we lost our contact. And it's very hard to verify any information coming out of the region itself. That's why the call to access civilians and refugees as well.
Well, let's check in on major stories on the continent. Concern is rising over the state of health of the Algerian president, Abdelmadjid Tebboune, who is yet to resume office, despite the presidency saying he will be returning home in the coming days. While some welcomed the news, others raised questions about the lack of clarity regarding the health condition of the country's leader. And in Uganda, Bobi Wine, the opposition candidate in an upcoming election, has suspended his campaigns following the injuring of members of his campaign team and damage to his car. According to the opposition, bullets were fired at his car, puncturing the tires and rendering it immobile. And finally, Ghanaians are participating in early voting ahead of national elections on Monday. President Nana Akufo-Addo is facing re-election, challenged by former President John Mahama. It is expected to be a tight contest. The Electoral Commission says the early polls are for essential workers, such as security personnel, journalists, and staff who will be busy on Election Day are expected to vote. Crossing over to Europe, as German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas has warned that Europe must not jeopardize peace negotiations for Afghanistan by withdrawing troops prematurely from the war-torn country. During a press conference earlier today, Mr. Maas said this is the reason Germany regarded the announcement from the United States over the last weeks with caution, because it did not know what kind of repercussions it would have with the Taliban. He, however, said that developments in the U.S. and in Washington suggest there is already a process of an orderly handover starting, and he is convinced that it will be organized in a way that there will not be any international repercussions, which will lead to unfavorable developments in terms of security policy. Iranian MPs today made several chants against the United States after a bill requiring the government to step up uranium enrichment cleared its first hurdle in Parliament. The bill would bring uranium enrichment closer to the level needed for a nuclear weapon and ignore other restraints on its nuclear program agreed with major powers. But the government promptly said the move proposed in response to the assassination of a top nuclear scientist on Friday could not change Iran's nuclear policy, which was the province of the Supreme National Security Council. Parliament has demanded a hardening of Iran's position on the nuclear issue in recent years without much success. The meteorological start of the winter came right on time with the real start of winter today, with parts of Germany being covered with a layer of snow and commuters struggling on icy roads in the morning. Several states even reported traffic accidents early this morning. The freezing temperatures had nothing on residents of Feldberg near Frankfurt. A number of them were out enjoying walks in the snow with their pets. Apparently, they have been looking forward to this time. A number of them said it was a nice start to the winter, especially in times of the coronavirus pandemic, and after years without snow. They called it the best this year has to offer. Meanwhile, cold temperatures are expected to stay for the next days, with more snow expected in some regions. Well, if it's freezing in Germany, you know it would be opposite temperatures down under in Australia. probably why an estimated 150 people dressed as Santa Claus hit the waters in Queensland's iconic Gold Coast on Sunday in a charity run for Australian children in residential care. A video obtained by Reuters showed a parade of jet skis going up and down the Nerang River in the Gold Coast, with its riders dressed as a crew of Santa Clauses who ditched their sleighs and reindeers for personal watercrafts. Organizers said the event raised nearly 10,000 Australian dollars for charity, which will eventually translate into Christmas presents for kids in care. The parade was held in an attempt to break the previous record of 129 jet skis in a parade held in 2014. Well, Santa on a jet ski definitely seems like a different kind of Christmas. But that's all for the world today. I'm Akaitse Afia. Have a great evening and stay safe.